We are going to now begin our afternoon portion of our program regarding the business panel. My name is Mark Cooper. I'm the director of the U.S. Department of Commerce office here in Indiana. My goal and my job is to help Indiana companies export. So I'm connected to the U.S. embassies around the world, and our whole objective is to help U.S. firms do business globally. And I'm excited to be a part of this program today, and I'm pleased to moderate our business panel on the U.S. Myanmar Engagement Conference. And I believe engagement is the key. And that's the key word perhaps of this conference, because I believe that, in fact, engagement is important in international trade. And I believe that international trade is a contact sport. And so that we indeed come together and build bridges and work together to see how our great countries can work together in international commerce. So I'm excited to be a part of that. I want to thank IUPUI, BACI, the Kelley School of Business for the opportunity to be here today. And I'm pleased to introduce an August set of panelists here. Some of us have been here this morning, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce them now again, and we're going to start this session. So I'm pleased to be joined today by an experienced set of panelists, and they're going to discuss the topic doing business in and with Myanmar. They're going to shed light on current investment environment in Myanmar, the specific legal requirements for foreign investment, and how companies and organizations can support Myanmar's economic development. To my right here, I have Ann Gilman. She's the Burma-Myanmar Desk Officer, a colleague of mine at the Office of ASEAN of the Pacific Basin in the International Trade Administration. We're both part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. We have next to her Danny Kai, who's the economic team leader in the Asia Bureau of USAID, who spoke quite eloquently to us this morning. And then we are really pleased, and it's just a great pleasure to have Sanda Luin, who is the economic attaché at the Embassy of the Union of the Republic of Myanmar from Washington, D.C. So we are excited to have her as well. And then at the very end, we have Jay Martin. He is a Myanmar consultant, U.S. ASEAN Business Council and John Hancock Associates, and so he is going to give us his comments as well. Since Jay and Sanda were not part of this morning's conversation, I'd like to invite Jay and Sanda to spend about 10 minutes each sharing a bit about themselves, their work in and about Myanmar. Sanda, perhaps we can start with you, and could you share with us your role as the economic attaché and the goings-on in Myanmar currently?
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to Indiana University and BACI for the opportunity to speak on doing business in and with Myanmar. Today, I'd like to highlight the investment reform in Myanmar for the foreign investors. As we are aware that Myanmar has entered into a new era since the government led by President U Thein Sein took office in 2011. Since then, the country has embarked upon a series of economic reform measures to more open up its doors to the world. Although we are in the early stage of economic development, and FDI is still viewed as an economic part, as an important part for job creation, technology, and capital assets in our country. We need to attract quality and responsible investment for our country, economic development, and to create favorable business environment. Government of Myanmar is undertaking the investment reform measures. So they are the legislative reform, policy reform, and institutional reform, and the procedure reform. As a part of the legislative reform, there are two laws related to foreign investment. They are foreign investment law and special economic zone law. So foreign investment law was actually enacted in 1988, and we revised for the first time in 24 years and enacted in 2012, November, followed by its rule in January 2013. For the special economic zone laws, we enacted in 2014. These laws give special incentives and grantee to foreign investors. Moreover, our Myanmar is the only country in ASEAN. We have two investment laws it means that separately with the for the Myanmar citizens and for foreign investors. So that's why we need to consolidate these two laws to become the one investment law. That's why, with the help of the International Finance Corporation, IFC, we are now consolidating these two laws to issue a new Myanmar investment law this year. So now we just finished seeking the public comments from home and abroad. Now we are in discussing with the international community and local entrepreneurs on this law. To do business in Myanmar, we have to an investor has to register under the Myanmar Companies Act. Actually, it is enacted in 1914, and it is already over 100 years old. So, to be compatible with current situation, we are now amending, with the help of the ADB, we are now amending the Companies Act. So now, this week, we released the draft version of Myanmar and English version on this law, and we are seeking the public comments. Yeah, and Asian Development Bank also render assistance to launch the online business registration. It is expected that it will be launched in late 2015 or next year. Moreover, we are in cooperation with the OECD for the policy framework for investment. The first investment policy review was released in March 2014. Now, we are amending we are consolidating the foreign investment two laws into one. Is a kind of following the recommendation from the OECD. For the policy matters, we also liberalize many sectors, such as the telecommunication and the power sector. These are restricted to the government, to the state only in the past. Now we also liberalize and we encourage the private participation for these sectors. We also we also allow the manufacturing of pharmaceutical for the foreign investors too. A part of institutional reform, we made tremendous changes in the setup of the Myanmar Investment Commission, which is the authority for the approval authority for all investment applications for domestic and foreign investors. In the previous time, Myanmar Investment Commission was composed with only the government ministers and deputy ministers. Today's MIC is very changed, and it is formed with not only ministers but also Attorney General, economists, experts, and entrepreneurs. And to cut the red tape, we also take the procedure reforms. So we streamline business registration procedures to expedite approval process. So we launched the one-stop service in 2013 to facilitate business registration and to provide necessary information to investors. Our vision is to become a modern, democratic, and developed nation that meets the aspirations of the people and through the people-centered development. That's why we need to encourage the regional development. Therefore, our office also need to recognizing the regional development. Our office also open in the other states and regions too. Now, for the time being, Myanmar Investment Commission has opened its branch office in Molamyai, Taungji, Mandalay, and we will have to extend more offices in other states so as we can the closer communication with the people in the other states and region. We are now developing special economic zones in 3 areas: Thilawa, Dawei, and Chao Phu. The developer of Tilawa Tilawa, as he said, is located at the outskirts of Yangon, and the developer is Myanmar-Japan Consortium. And it is expected that it can be operationalized in late 2015. For the Dawei Special Economic Zone, Dawei and Chaopyu Economic Zone will be a trade corridor of Myanmar with the Southeast Asia, East Asia, Middle East, Africa, and China by linking through sea and land routes. The Special Economic Zone is really a mega development project, and including the deep sea port. If the project is completed, it is believed that it will become the largest deep sea port in Southeast Asian region. The developer, the Special Economic Zone is a kind of a joint project between Myanmar, Thailand, and Japan. For the Chaopyu Special Economic Zone it is located in Rakhine State. And we are now still, the procedures are still undergoing to have the developer and investors. To create the favorable business environment, we also undertake significant reform measures in financial and banking sectors. Now, 9 foreign banks are in operation for the first time in 50 years in our country, and we are now procedures as undergoing to establish Yangon Stock Exchange Center with the help of Taiwan Institute of Japan. We are now moving forward to set the minimum wage for labor and then to increase the labor standards. At the same time, we are in cooperation with US, Japan, Denmark, and ILO as a new initiative to improve fundamental labor rights and practice in Myanmar. We are recognizing the important roles of IPR, intellectual property right, to attract the foreign investment in Myanmar. We are now drafting IPR law. For transparency and accountability in oil and gas and mining industries, Myanmar joined Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, in July 2014, which is comprised with 48 member countries. Under the Myanmar foreign investment law, we offer significant incentives to the investors, such as, let's say, income tax exemption for 5 years and exemption on relief of income tax on profit, and then right to deduct the research and development expenditure. Such kind of the incentives are provided. We are also increasing the bilateral relationship with US with the landmark visits by President Obama and President U Thein Sein. We have concluded the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement for Economic and Technical Cooperation, and we also, the inaugural meeting for trade and investment between Myanmar and US was held in June 2014 in Naypyidaw. We also signed agreement on the program of Peace Corps in Myanmar. At the same time, USAID provides grant assistance to Myanmar, focusing in priority areas such as democracy, human rights, and rule of law. USAID announced a new economic growth program in Myanmar in March 2014. It focuses on creating more inclusive economic governance, rules and process, and increasing access to finance for emerging economic actors. I'd like to take the opportunity to express our sincere thanks for every single assistance rendered to us. Yeah. We are also stepping up economic cooperation with the international organization. World Bank Group also endorsed 2015-17 Country Partnership Framework, CPF, in April 2015, which will provide the $1.6 billion in credits, loans, and grants, as well as technical assistance and knowledge. World Bank also give a special focus on the agricultural sector and power sector too. Myanmar is a member of the New York Convention and Geneva Convention. Myanmar also signed multilateral investment agreement, MIGA, in 2013. Seeing is believing. Myanmar received a record of more than $8 billion in foreign investment in last fiscal year, 2014. It is nearly double from the previous year. Our total foreign investment amount is $56.4 billion. Most of the major investors are from China, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, UK, and Korea. US ranks 14 among 38 countries and territories with the pledged investment amount of US $243 million only. Nowadays, US firms such as GE, Coca-Cola, Ford, ConocoPhillips, Chevron, Palmolive, APR Energy, MetLife are known in Myanmar. Every day I receive the increase in number of investors who are interested in Myanmar. So not only in trade but also in investment, but they are waiting for the 2015 election result. The absence of US firms in Myanmar may advantage to other investors from Japan, China, Korea, and Singapore and EU. They are already in our market to enjoy and tap business opportunities, while most of the US firms are in exploratory stage and with the cautiously optimistic to Myanmar. Our bilateral trade relationship between two countries is increasing since the normalization of the relations of leaders. So I'd like to conclude that Myanmar US firms are globally renowned companies for responsible for investment and labors and with high CSR, job creation, and for idea of innovation. Therefore, investing in Myanmar by US firms will be a meaningful contribution to our economic development and people, while we are dynamically moving forward to become a nation with people-centered development. In conclusion, I believe that increasing business relationship between our two countries is a truly and pragmatic way for promoting sustainable friendship and mutual understanding. Thank you for your kind interest in Myanmar.
Thank you, Sanda. Jay, as I understand that you are now based in Yangon, and can you tell us what you've been doing on behalf of the U.S.-ASEAN Business Council?
Sure. Well, I guess first just a little bit of background. I mean, the U.S.-ASEAN Business Council represents mainly Fortune 500 companies, I mean, really the top investors. And we operate in all 10 countries in Southeast Asia. Many countries we have an office. In Myanmar, we actually don't have an office. Until we get one, I consult with the US-ASEAN Business Council until they can establish something full-time. But basically, as far as the US-ASEAN Business Council goes, we are we try to act as the voice of the US private sector in Southeast Asia. In 2012, the US-ASEAN Business Council led the first business mission to Myanmar in 25 years. We hit the ground 2 days after President Obama announced the suspension of some sanctions against Myanmar. Every year since then, we've led delegations to Myanmar on business missions. We'll be doing another one next month at the end of June. We'll be meeting with most of the ministers of the major ministries, as well as President U Thein Sein, and as well as the opposition leader who we heard from earlier today. Day to day, I commonly listen to members' concerns about what it takes to operate in Myanmar, the problems they encounter. I raise what I can with the Myanmar government. I send the rest on to Washington, and they do what they can as well. But in addition to the US-ASEAN Business Council, I also work for John Hancock Associates, which is a much smaller business advising and consulting firm, and we just try to help with all aspects of Myanmar market entry, licensing, and permitting procedures. It's kind of like the Shawshank Redemption. We're the guys who try to get things for people. Not always easy, but we try. Is that enough for you?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I like the Shawshank reference. That was nice.
Well, yeah, my mentor told me that one.
Well, thank you very much. One of our panelists this morning made a comment which I thought was very apropos, talking about it is a transition, not a revolution, and we were talking about that politically. I'm going to ask our panelists to comment in just a moment about if that might be said economically as well. So we are very interested in our panelists' commentary, so I'm going to open it to any of them and ask, how does Myanmar compare with other countries in the region when it comes to attractiveness to investors, For instance, in terms of risk, legal barriers, infrastructural development, returns on investment. Tell us, panelists, and any of you can start, how does Myanmar compare? We've talked a little bit about some of the other regional issues, but many of U.S. companies, I'm sure, want to know, how does Myanmar compare to Thailand or Cambodia or Laos or Malaysia? So I'm not sure who'd like to start, so I'll open the panel.
Sure. Okay, I'll take a first stab at it. As I mentioned on the first panel, I think Myanmar compares well to its neighbors in that it has a high GDP growth rate, sizable population, not the largest in Southeast Asia. Indonesia's population exceeds it, and I believe Thailand is larger also, but also pretty sizable, continuous landmass. A lot of the other Southeast Asian nations have a lot of islands that can make logistics also a little bit more difficult. It is a risky business environment, but there's risk everywhere. So I think it is probably a little bit riskier than some of its neighbors because of the political uncertainty also. Infrastructure is not as good as some of its direct neighbors that I've worked with, but I think when you compare it to a country like Laos or maybe even Cambodia, the infrastructure I think is a little better. I think the natural resources are greater than some of the neighboring countries, and I think the trend in terms of opening up to foreign investors, welcoming them, is better than some of the other countries in ASEAN.
Danny?
Sure.
Just to follow Anne's comments, absolutely agree. I think there is so much potential and opportunity in Burma. I think some of the challenges we highlighted earlier in the first panels still remains, but compared to other countries, you know, we have the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement in place, the TIFA, and then, you know, and U.S. investment is starting to flow, but there's still a lot of challenges ahead. And in terms of some of the other countries, you know, I'm just going to take a couple countries and just compare and contrast. For example, like a lot of companies have been talking about Vietnam recently, particularly in the context of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the administration's free trade agreement for Asia and the Pacific. Sorry. There are big differences in terms of, you know, the legal environment, the regulatory environment. However, one thing that's really positive is that, you know, there's so much hunger in Burma. There's so much hunger to work with American companies. There's so much hunger to really reform and continue the reform process. So that's very positive. However, there's still challenges in terms of actual the right legal environment. And once you have the right legal environment in place, there's the implementation of those laws and policies as well.
Okay. Sandra, do you have a comment from the Myanmar perspective? Comparing Myanmar to your neighbors, what would you say? People were saying, why would we invest there? Vietnam, as Danny is just mentioning, many people are talking about that as a market, but tell us from the Myanmar perspective.
Yes, in Myanmar, we also received the investment from Vietnam also. Because it means that we can attract the foreign investment.
Right, exactly.
Just kidding. Yeah. So because our population size is big, and then we have natural resources, and now we have many challenges in terms of the legal and requirement and the infrastructure. It is very very much challenging. But I think investors, they see that. We are on track to cope these challenges, because we cannot finish overnight. That's why we get the investor belief from the regions. That's why we have the increasing trend of the foreign investment in Myanmar, and then nowadays, most of the investment comes into the government sector. It is the labor intensive. So it means that in comparison with our neighboring countries, Laos and Cambodia and Vietnam, we have such kind of strength in labor costs, and we also possess the the young people population rate. Yeah, it is the, as far as I learned is that Myanmar is one of the top country and such kind of the labor force, young labor force in ASEAN region. Such kind of, the factors are we can attract the foreign investment.
I just want to follow on that comment.
Yeah, follow on, go ahead.
I was
That's
going to
right.
say that, you know, Burma has an advantage in many ways. You know, it can learn from its neighbors. So you had mentioned like labor, like it's the garment industry in particular as an area for growth. So the U.S. and Burma launched a U.S. labor initiative recently, last year, I believe it was. And so there's an opportunity to really learn from its neighbors and learn what has worked well and what hasn't worked well, and how to improve upon that for Burma.
Jay, why don't you comment about from the U.S. ASEAN Business Council perspective? How do your members see this, and what's their perspective?
Well, yeah, the comparison question is an interesting one. You know, I'm not really sure how to answer it. Myanmar is unique in many ways, and many of the challenges that businesses face in Myanmar, you know, I know they face elsewhere. I mean, challenges surrounding customs, I'm sure, is a problem not just in Myanmar. It's a problem in many other places. Perhaps fortuitously, recently, well, not recently, but back in November, the President U Thein Sein asked President Obama, you know, why has American investment been so slow to materialize in Myanmar? And the task fell to us at the U.S. ASEAN Business Council to put together a paper that kind of enumerates some of the reasons. And what I found in talking to many businesses in that what really holds them back in Myanmar is just this opacity, just this lack of information and difficulty of getting it. You know, Myanmar, of course, has problems with the SDN list. Coupled with that is the problem of obtaining any reliable company registration data on Myanmar companies. It's just extremely difficult to do that. Due diligence is extremely difficult to do. There's a lack of information on draft laws and draft legislation. The foreign investment law, the new one, is great. With the cooperation of IFC, we've been getting good drafts of that. However, try to get a draft of the new mining law, good luck. I've begged, I've asked, I've pleaded, I've cajoled. I've gotten a few dribs and drabs, but that's about it. And that's not terribly unique as far as trying to get information from the government goes. So that is a significant challenge. There are other minor issues with Myanmar, some little quirks, like visas, for example. There's no work permit available in Myanmar. Most businessmen in Myanmar are there on a business visa, which, as many of you know, every 70 days you have to go out of the country. Well, that adds a lot of time and expense, and especially if you have an employee out on an oil rig, you know, you've got to take him off, you got to put him on a plane to Thailand or whatever to get him out of the country. So things like that really add up. And I don't know if those problems are unique to Myanmar, but they certainly are especially problematic when it comes to Myanmar. You know, in terms of also infrastructure, you know, one thing that I haven't heard pointed out a whole lot is the lack in Myanmar of a legal infrastructure. I mean, we talk a lot about commercial law development of companies' laws, of foreign investment law. That's really important, but what happens when it comes to the interpretation of these laws? I mean, the legal profession in Myanmar, I don't know if decimated is the correct adjective, but I think it's pretty close. You know, when it comes to interpreting these laws, it's somewhat of a mystery as to how the common law tradition is going to develop, where you have enough qualified lawyers who are able to pull out general principles from each individual cases. That's going to take time to develop. So that is also, I think, a unique problem where it comes to Myanmar. Of course, you know, kind of counterbalancing all these unique challenges in Myanmar are all these unique opportunities. There's 500 million people living in the nations and closest areas of India and China directly bordering Myanmar. You look at Myanmar's arable land, its low population density, it's just a natural attractor of foreign direct investment. So that's how I would say Myanmar compares favorably with its competitors. But also, I think it needs to be appreciated that Myanmar is a competitor. I mean, there is a competition for foreign direct investment. And it is a learning process with the government where it comes to public-private consultations for example, through some things like vehicles like the Myanmar Business Forum. The IFC, again, is bringing together Myanmar corporations and international corporations to interface with government counterparts now on a regular basis, and that is already beginning to yield fruits as far as commercial law development goes. But there's still a lot of negative inertia within Myanmar with respect to these public-private consultations. There still is, in some government circles, and I do emphasize the word some, U is great in MIC, there are plenty of people who are really forward-thinking and know what they're doing, but there's also an element that wants to hold back and to kind of keep the government's prerogative and doesn't really see how the private sector fits into the construction of the legislation that's eventually going to govern it. So that's a little bit of my perspective anyway. I don't know if these problems are really unique to Myanmar, but they're certainly important to Myanmar.
I think it was interesting this morning from some of the commentary from some of our panelists to note, and I tell U.S. firms because that's part of my job, I tell U.S. firms all the time, we have to look at Southeast Asia, and we have to really be careful about this because many U.S. firms look at the world and say, we're very comfortable doing business in the United States, and we haven't looked abroad. But I'm telling you, I was just stationed in Indonesia for a month at the embassy there. And what I found were an incredible amount of Chinese influence in that part of the world, a lot of investment, a lot of activity. I think some of our panelists made those comments this morning, and Professor O'Meara made that comment this morning. And I think what, at least from the U.S. perspective, and I'm speaking from the federal government perspective, but we have to look at these emerging markets and we have to be engaged in it. That's why I was saying the engagement is the key. We cannot, in fact, just say, oh, well, that's a far away. That's a long way from the United States, because this is a smaller world and a global economy, and I really do believe that we have to be engaged in it. So it's really interesting when Sanda told about the level of investment from different nations. It wasn't that much that I heard from the United States in the market, and so I mean it's indicative that we have to play in the market. We have to do business in these markets. And so that leads me to the next section of the type of questions. Many of our companies and many U.S. firms want to know about the logistics of getting in. How do I get into the market? How do I start? What are the logistics? What's the legal environment? How am I protected? How's my factory, or if I have one, or how am I going to distribute the product? And is that an issue? So I'd like our panelists to discuss for just a moment about the operating environment. How to operate in the country. Is it a distribution model? Is it a joint venture model? How is investment? You mentioned, Jay, about the foreign investment law. So if a U.S. company specifically was wanting to go into that market, what are your pieces of advice for going into the market, and how would they proceed? Because I think that's one of the things. There's a lot of things that all your expertise, panelists here, could tell us and say, how would we know what's the best strategy for our firm to enter the market? So, Jay, why don't I ask you to start this time on the other end, and then we'll take it coming this way.
Yeah, you know, a lot of it, of course, is going to depend on exactly what, you know, which market you're looking to enter. You know, of course, you know, whether or not you have to partner with a local Myanmar firm, that's governed by MIC notification number 49. You know, it specifies which, you know, which sectors are prohibited for the foreign investor, which sectors are available only through joint venture with a Myanmar entity, and which sectors are open to 100% foreign investment. You know, again, strategy is also going to depend on, you know, what sector you're operating on. Just speaking, you know, with respect to the one that I'm, you know, most recently familiar with, namely mining. Again, here you run into the problem that, you know, there really is no one-stop place you can go to for step-by-step instructions as to how to enter the market or how to get the mining permit. So you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They set up a ministry with meeting with the Minister of Mines. They push you on to the DGSE, and you start having technical discussions. At some point, you have to talk to DICA about setting up an entity. Well, are you going to set up a joint venture, or are you going to go with 100% foreign investment? By the law, by the black letter law, you can go through 100% foreign investment, but you may want to find, and you probably do want to find, a local JV partner. So how do you do that? You need to figure that out. You start talking to DGSE, they push you on to MOCAF for the environmental part of it, so you have to know who to talk to in MOCAF. the list just goes on. And, what I would recommend to anybody trying to enter the market is that, that they enlist the help, of course, of somebody who's actually on the ground in Myanmar and knows about these things. But it's just a matter of being there and of actually going to these ministries and speaking face to people, which in and of itself can be quite of a challenge. So, I mean, I think I'll stop right there, just reiterating, though, that if you're looking for a clear set of step-by-step instructions on how to do anything, you're going to have a tough time coming by it, and that's one of the challenges.
All right, thank you. Ms. Luen, would you like to comment about the steps of setting up businesses in Myanmar? Do you have any type of commentary that you'd like to add to Jay, what she had said?
I'd like to also share experience of my DG Uaunaiu.
Okay.
For the setting up of the businesses in Myanmar.
Sure.
One day he was on other country and he got a complaint on for the taking long very much time. I think 6 months to get the license from Tiger for the establishment of the foreign companies. So he went back to when he arrived at our office. He had to go to make investigation to us at the time. Had to go because most of the foreign investors they trying to get license. It is very natural that they through the other person, not directly come to our office. That's why sometimes he doesn't know how to go. It takes much longer time. So that's why this investor has to wait for 6 months. At the time when we check in our office registration, the application registration, we didn't receive this application. Because I think that we think that the third person didn't send to our office, but he gave the wrong signal to the investors. That's why the investor possession, it takes very much long time. Actually, we didn't receive, and for the Myanmar companies, in the past, it takes sometimes 3 or 4 months to get the business registration license from our office, and for foreign companies, it takes more than 6 months or something like that. But now, after the 2013, after setting up of the OSS, we got the name. Check-in is it takes only 2 or 3 days. After the name is approved, we issue the license to the Myanmar companies within a day. And then, foreign businesses, we issued as much as we can. We expedite the process. But one thing is that we just wait a few days, not a few weeks, for receiving the financial statement from the foreign businesses. It is only that, but I think it is foreign businesses can get the business license. Maybe within 2 weeks, 2 weeks and 1 week. Yes, yeah. So such kind of the misunderstanding between our government offices and the foreign businesses we have. So we every time I met with the foreign investors in Myanmar and in here, I encourage them to go directly to the office if they have some difficulties. Because as he mentioned that our DG Uaunaiu is a very good performance, and so we want to hear the voices from the investors, the challenges and difficulties. If we hear their challenges and difficulties, only when we hear, we can solve the problem, and we can make the reform for the policies. Yeah.
Okay. So. Danny or Ann, do you have anything to add to that, or do you think we covered it?
I think a lot of it has been covered already, but I'll just make one comment. I think, Jay, you described really, really well what it's like to do business in Burma. It's quite challenging, but it is improving. There are changes, and it's evolving. One additional comment was that, even if it depends sector by sector, but even if it's 100% like foreign investment, company might not want to go in there
that's an important
directly,
point, yeah.
And you might want to just work with local partners, work with firms that have a presence on the ground in Burma, who know the players, who can guide.
So you're saying you need a
process.
local partner, really. Let's try to emphasize that for the audience. I think that's what you're saying. So if you're going to do business in the market, what the panelists are saying is you really have to have a local partner. Was that a fair comment?
Highly recommend that.
Okay.
And then some companies and some of the larger companies have actually gone in, not only finding a local partner, but some of the larger companies have actually gone in with their CSR arm first to get a sense of the market, to understand what's going on, and to kind of reinforce the American brand of investment before fully investing in Burma.
I have a question about that, because companies ask me this all the time. What's the level, and just be honest, what's the level of English proficiency if I don't speak the language? You can just tell us, how hard is that going to be for me? I mean, I obviously know that it's not prevalent, but I want to know how big of an impediment it is, the language issue in the market.
It is an impediment, but I think in Burma, English language skills are a lot higher than other countries in the region. So it's actually an advantage, a comparative advantage compared to other countries in the region.
So that's interesting. So I hear you saying that compared to the other regions of Southeast Asia, English is more spoken in Burma than perhaps in some other countries that are neighbors.
At least in the urban areas.
At least, okay. Well, that's fair, though. I mean, because I think that's an important discussion point that we make. I'd like to move on to another side element of this same point, which is if our panelists would discuss about the sectors. Just give us a brief, if you were looking at this market for a U.S. company and they were saying, I want to invest here or I want to do business here, does anyone have any commentary about sectors they see as promising areas that U.S. companies should consider doing business in as opposed to some others? So, Ann, do you want to make a comment about that if you have any comment, or I'll open it to other panelists?
Sure, I can comment. Some of the sectors I mentioned earlier this morning, such as construction equipment, medical devices, energy, consumer goods, I think all offer opportunities for American companies looking to get involved in Burma. And then I just wanted to back up a little bit to the last question too, that for a company looking to enter the market, that I think actually I was on the DICA website for a while the other day, the Department of Investment and Company Administration, and I think they actually have been putting up a lot of information and even created a little flow chart of what a company needs to do step by step to get a business license. So I think that there actually is a lot of information out there for a company, and that doesn't mean it always follows the process, but it's a start, a visual start. And also, I really want to advise companies who want to get into the market to use your U.S. government resources. Use Mark here and the Use the Act to ask them what to do, and then the senior commercial officer and the commercial specialist on the ground, like that's their job. Your tax dollars are paying for, and it's like a full business development arm where they can advise you on who would be the right partners, what market, what sectors could be good opportunities, and also they work at trade shows in the region where they bring buyer delegations from Myanmar to the trade show, like probably in Singapore because they're kind of the regional hub for trade shows, and then help U.S. companies that go to these trade shows to showcase their goods. They give them lessons on the market, so the U.S. company representatives are ready to sell to the different countries, and then they introduce them to the buyers from all the Southeast Asian countries. And I just also wanted to note that companies investing in the market should have some cultural sensitivity and be aware of what practices in marketing may or may not be appropriate. For example, like cultural or religious symbols, you should not use them in marketing, so understand kind of how that works there. And then also understand that for many of your products, you're going to need to educate the market about what this product is and how to use it. Would be a first step when you're entering. And so that goes back to also the market opportunities that are there. You know, there are a lot of opportunities, but it's also created opportunities, and I think goes back to the story of the shoes of, you know, you don't see anyone wearing shoes. Well, that's a great opportunity for a lot of new shoe wearers, but maybe you should educate them about the benefits of shoe wearing.
Thank you. We're going to move on just a little bit in the same vein. Aung San Suu Kyi talked this morning and said that as far as business investments have been primarily benefiting the upper class in Myanmar. And so I thought that was an interesting comment, and rather than the general population. So I'd like our panelists to comment. I was just in Indonesia, as I mentioned earlier, and we saw some of the similarities when I was in Jakarta about the coterie of folks that had opportunities, and that she mentions the same thing, that some regulations, some opportunities are available to those that are already invested or those that are vested. and specifically the upper class. So I'd like our panelists, if you would, and I'll open it to any of them, to comment about how is that opportunity flow? Is there an opportunity only for those of the upper class, or do you think there's more opportunities in that general population? And how is that changing, or do you see it changing now? And I'll open it. Anybody that wants to take it.
Before we open up our doors to the foreign investors, it is not easy to find a good paid job, a good salary job in our country, and nowadays it is easier to get the job, not only the job but also the high paid job in our country, and then it is easier to get to create the employment for the general public, because we encourage the foreign investment with the labor-intensive industries. It is our Myanmar Investment Commission policy. That's why these days we can create the business opportunities. We can create the employment opportunities for the general public, and then not for the graduate people also. It is easier to find a job in our country.
So there's a trickling down effect. You're seeing not just the wealthy basically benefiting from that?
Wealthy, because in our country, most of the, because it is very natural in other countries that they are the very, the giant the giant businessmen in every country. So they also benefit. They can also benefit from such kind of our economic openness. I mean that not only to the giant businesses, but also to the general public and small companies. Because if we receive the foreign investments, it is a kind of this process for the encouraging the supportive industries for the small and medium enterprises. Thus, these days, as our SME are also, they are getting busier, and the people are also they are easier to get the job, and then for the very general public, they can also get a job in the factories, let's say, because every day we receive the CMP factories, CMP investment in our country. Mm-hmm. So it means that it is a kind of the labor intensive. So we can create the job opportunities to the general public.
Jay, tell me about SMEs. Then you're the ASEAN Business Council. What's your take on the role of SMEs in the economy and how that's doing, and basically commenting on that statement as well? Do you have any comment about that?
Well, first let me go back to the ladies' comments really quick, because okay, sure. I hate to be the heavy here, but in an election year in Myanmar, you're the opposition leader. What else are you going to say about how economic benefits have or have not improved the lives of people? Of course, you're not going to say that they've improved the lives of everybody. And I say that not to question the lady. I have nothing but respect for her, but it's only to point out that there's a political reality in Myanmar that is, in point of fact, quite complex. And so when assessing questions like, who has improved with the economic changes that have occurred in Myanmar, I think it's very important to remember that everyone has their own lens through which they view these things. And I'll leave it at that for now. But as far as the question of SMEs go, and as far as U.S. ASEAN Business Council members, SMEs are integral to the supply chains for major multinational corporations. And so the U.S. ASEAN Business Council is always looking for ways to improve the performance of SMEs, improve the capacity of SMEs to act as part of supply chains. Of course, from our perspective, a lot of that hinges on regulatory reform and regulatory improvements that make it easier for U.S. businesses to enter the Myanmar market. One example I can think of is the issue of trading. Right now, again, by the black letter law, U.S. companies or foreign companies are allowed to engage in trading in Myanmar, where that's defined as importing goods for the purposes of resale or buying goods in Myanmar and then reselling them. But as a matter of policy, they can't do it. This is an obstacle to investment for a lot of U.S. corporations. They want control of their supply chains, and ultimately the employees that they hire in Myanmar will use the skills that they learned working for U.S. corporations to go out and form their own businesses. So we view that and those kinds of policy changes as actually really helping Myanmar SMEs over the long term. And of course, we're always, looking for other ways to improve the performance of SMEs because in today's world, they're an integral part of supply chains and supply chain management.
Any, do you have comments?
Sure. Just to follow on Jay's comments, so for USAID, small medium enterprises are the backbone of the economy. When you look at the economy in Burma, like depending on which reports you look at, SMEs make up like 96 to 99% of the private sector, but they make up a very, very small percentage of actual GDP growth. And in the past, perhaps the business community has benefited mainly the elite, but I think that's changing, that's evolving, as Jay has pointed out. The focus on small, medium enterprises is so important because if you really want to ensure that economic development is inclusive, you have to look at making sure that small, medium enterprises are part of the process as well, because they're the ones that are more diverse. They hire more people. They are the backbone of the economy, and giving them access to, regional and global markets are so important. We actually have a partnership with U.S. ASEAN Business Council on competitive SMEs, giving SMEs the tools and the training and the mentorship that they need in order to link up with regional and global supply chains. And in addition to SMEs, when you look at SMEs, they've been around in Burma for at least 6 years. The importance of new entrants and ensuring that the regulatory environment is right to allow for competition and for new businesses to start, and the importance of this mobile revolution. People are saying that there's this mobile revolution in Burma, and how that can change the way SMEs and other businesses are using technology and also penetrating the local economy and ensuring that more people are involved in the economic development process.
Comment on the trickle-down effect if business investment is only benefiting the upper class. I think that there's actually more widespread benefits. For example, power suppliers are supplying power to, APR's project, for example, supplying power to 6 million people. Not all of those people are upper class citizens. The telephone industry with the greater ease to access SIM cards, and I haven't been to Burma in about a year, but I'm not sure if the price has gone down, but last time they were pretty expensive.
Well, they're $1.50 now, so yeah.
There you go.
Great.
So that is
Yeah.
definitely a great benefit. And also, regular consumer goods products such as toothpaste, and then also the CSR benefits that these big companies bring that affect a lot more than just the upper class.
I got one more thing to point out with respect to SMEs. Right now, approximately 4% of Myanmar SMEs have access to financing. Until that improves, there's going to be a major constraint on SME development in Myanmar.
Yeah, that's important. Nick, this morning, I think he mentioned about KFC and made me hungry immediately. And we were talking about, but he raises a couple of important points. One is, I didn't know you could get burgers at KFC, but maybe I'm wrong. But he talked about the idea of the supply chain and the idea that you have to have good infrastructural supply chain to get the ingredients and the products that support your business. And so that this is growing, and this is a hallmark of KFC's commitment to the market because they see the potential of this. So I'd like to ask our panelists to comment a little more. I think as we see the juxtaposition of this morning's panel and this panel, we did discuss about business, but if you could perhaps talk about some strong examples of how U.S. companies have managed to successfully enter the market. So if you have more examples of some companies that have done well. We'd like to, it's always great to have a success story. We always want to hear, how's somebody really doing well here? And so we'd like to, anybody that would like to hold forth about a U.S. firm, and it doesn't have to be General Electric. I think that was my issue, and that is my issue. In fact, is that it doesn't have to be General Electric. We thank God for General Electric, I'm glad, but it's always nice to have a company that doesn't have to be a multi-billion-dollar company that is successful in a market. And so any of those examples that you'd like to tell us about, we're all ears. Anybody?
when it comes to Myanmar at this point in time, I think we have to be really careful about how we define the term success.
Okay.
Nobody's raking in a lot of money in Myanmar right now.
All right.
I mean, if you're a foreign bank, for example, and you've been granted a banking license, okay, you have $75 million of paid-in capital, but the restrictions on the loans that you can give are so much that you're not going to make any money. Is that success? You know, for a mining firm who's got exploration licenses in areas that have never been explored using modern techniques, you're just going out and, you know, poking around, maybe drilling a few holes, and then if you find anything, you've got a world of complexity when it comes to getting local buy-in, when it comes to actually setting up a production facility, bargaining with the government for an equitable production sharing agreement. So if you're pouring millions of dollars into exploration, is that success? In terms of supply chain, you know, KFC, I think, is an interesting example because the poultry industry in Myanmar is actually fairly well developed, mostly by Thai firms. So KFC kind of finds itself in a position where it has a supply chain ready-made. That's not true for Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola finds itself going in and building out its own supply chain. You know, and the director for Coca-Cola in Myanmar once told me that they don't expect to turn a profit in Myanmar for quite some time.
What about the water? Like the water, is that an issue in Myanmar for Coca-Cola?
I don't know about the water specifically. Yeah, I don't know. It probably is, but I have no idea. You
So
know, but it is, you know, generally importing goods to, you know, to make their product is certainly a challenge that they face. But I don't know that water is one of them. You know. But you know, the larger point is that, you know, here's a situation where a whole supply chain has to be developed. However, the same was true for Coca-Cola in Japan, and as the country director for Myanmar pointed out to me, Japan's one of their most profitable places where Coca-Cola does business right now. So if you define success in the right sort of way, lots of people have been successful in Myanmar, and that success is only going to increase. But, you know, we have to be careful about how we define the term and how we manage our expectations for what performance in Myanmar is going to be like, at least for the next 5-10 years.
Okay. Other panelists, go ahead, Ann.
Sure. Myanmar used to be the, you know, rice bowl of Southeast Asia and also a transportation hub. So I think companies are taking and need to take a long-term view of what this country could hopefully become in the future of, you know, really the center of in between the two largest population countries, and then in Southeast Asia, really establishing a strong foothold there will benefit them in the future.
I was just going to say I absolutely agree with Jay and with Ann that it's really hard to, you know, to say success because it's still too early, and we still have a ways to go in terms of, you know, with the upcoming elections, with also increased opening. And, you know, Jay had cited some of the challenges, even for big corporations. I don't want that to discourage any company who's interested in investing in Burma. I still think there are enormous opportunities, but, you know, just managing the expectations and realizing the challenges. Some of the larger companies like, you know, Coca-Cola have its challenges. Gap is now in Burma, and they're starting off very, very small. Cisco, HP, Microsoft, they're all starting off very small first before expanding, just given the political environment. So just keeping in mind the managing expectations.
Okay. I think that's a great point, but even as we say that people are starting out small, but they're starting.
Yes.
I think maybe that may be part of the overarching message for the market itself, is that we have to look at these markets, as we keep saying throughout this conference and throughout this business panel, is that we have to have a balanced perspective, right? We have to look at the opportunities as well as the obstacles and see that as the world gets smaller, these opportunities, we have to engage in them. And so I appreciate your comments about a measured definition of success. And so I think that's an important point for us to keep. We only have just a couple more minutes, so I'm going to ask anyone if they'd like to comment one last question before we open it to the audience about, are there particular U.S. companies that have been doing a strong job? And you mentioned, I think, Danny, this morning, corporate social responsibility into their business models in Myanmar that anybody wants to mention. So CSR as a part of their business plan. Does anyone have a comment on that before we go?
Yeah, I did want to mention Google that took initiative, but a Google employee started an initiative to translate Google into Burmese as a side project that was not for profit, and enlisted the help of Burmese Americans and Burmese around the world, and in Myanmar that helps translate. We're working day and night, and so I participated bigly in this project. But that was a cool idea, or cool example of a big company, making an effort to get to know the market and translate it into the native language, one of the native languages of a big country.
GAP has, when it entered, it actually started off with the commitment to do CSR. So they have a program called PACE, which trains women who work in the factories on life skills, life maintenance, and so they started with that commitment of CSR. HP as well, we're working with HP on an entrepreneurship program called HP Life. Microsoft, we're working with them and the University of Washington on a university partnership initiative. Cisco also is now in Burma. Cisco is working with a couple of the universities on training them on and certification on the Cisco Networking Academies. There's a number of different companies. Actually, it's been quite impressive in terms of the number of American businesses going in there with CSR, and not only with CSR, but just keeping in mind kind of the social, environmental ramifications of investment. So it's been quite impressive.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just say, if you look at, Caterpillar with their heavy equipment mechanic student selection program in education, it's pretty amazing, or the PNG water donation program, or Visa and its efforts to instill financial literacy and setting up programs all over the country. American firms are world leaders in CSR, and I think what's really resonating, I think, with the people in Myanmar is this particular kind of CSR is CSR that lasts. It's not just going out and throwing out soccer balls. I mean, American companies are really making efforts either by themselves or through their NGO partners like PACT Myanmar. They're really working to make long-lasting changes in the economy and the environment, and it's not lost on anybody in Myanmar.
Thank you very much, panelists. We'd like to open the floor to some of you. If you have questions of our panel here, this is a great opportunity. We have a microphone in the middle of the floor, and please come right ahead, and we'd love to hear your question or commentary regarding our business panel today.
Before I ask my question, I just wanted to let the audience know that it used to cost $1,500 to buy a SIM in Myanmar, $1,500. And 4 years ago, when I first went back, I had to pay $500 for my SIM. And today it's $1.50. So I don't know who's benefiting. My question is this. We talked about government capacity this morning. And that also applies to the whole country. There are very few people with skills. So when you have new embassies opening up, new NGOs, INGOs coming in, companies coming in, there isn't a very big pool of skilled people. And I want to ask if US companies are really looking, you really need a training program. Because a couple of weeks ago, I got a locksmith to replace my lock. He struggled with it for 2 hours. I finally fixed it for him. Thank you.
Panelists, would you like to comment?
Every U.S. company I talk to faces capacity issues. The idea that there's a labor surplus in Myanmar is actually a myth. There's a labor shortage because there's a lack of capacity. It extends down to to the education system. I lived in Myanmar for a short time at where rural children come in and they live at a particular place and they get help at night and then they go to the school during the day. When they were learning their science lesson, it was on photosynthesis, and their method of learning it was just to memorize paragraphs by rote. There was no attempt to learn the methodology that is science. There was no attempt to learn, what a hypothesis is, how it relates to observation, things like that. And it comes out that when I talk to U.S. companies, the number one skill that they need that they don't have, almost to the company, is critical thinking skills. It's something that cuts across all industries. You know, how you get at the root of this problem, how you solve it, you know, I honestly don't know. But it's an interesting and important problem that needs to be addressed, I think, at really the deepest levels.
Ms. Lewin, would you like to comment from Myanmar's perspective on the capacity issues?
Yes, yeah. We are lack of the skilled labor. So that's why we encourage in our, according to our foreign investment law, we encourage the foreign investors to provide the training to the staff for the skill, and then we also encourage the contribution of the composition of the local laborers in companies year by year, and then also we for the government sector we also seek the assistance from the international cooperation and some of the under the bilateral programs. We also do the capacity building programs. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
Sure. I think capacity is a big issue, and for both the public sector and the private sector. So just emphasizing again, like our comments earlier in terms of finding a local partner, working with a local partner and how important that is. And then also some American companies are actually going in and they're trying to address the capacity issue. Like for example, Cisco created the Cisco Networking Academies. That not only helps with the capacity issue, but it also helps strengthen the local university as well. In addition to that, for USAID programs, we have a very strong capacity building component to every single project, every single sector in our portfolio. So if we're working with the government, there is a capacity building component of local staff in the government, getting local staff up to speed on regional and international standards and international agreements. When it comes to working with civil society, we have a capacity component as well, working with local NGOs. So we weave it into everything we do. But that is a very good question and a very big challenge, and I think it's something that all donors and also all companies face, and that we're hopefully addressing that issue, but it will be a long-term process.
All right. Next question, please.
Yes. Before I ask my question, I did want to respond to what Mr. Martin said about critical thinking skills. Yes, I agree with you that, you know, we have had a long period of time when we are not allowed to think critically. So that's why that skill is missing, but now we are free, and I'm sure that skill will be developed. But critical thinking skill is something that lacks even here in the university, because I teach our students here critical thinking skills in their writing also. So you can see that, and it is essential. There are reforms required in the education system there. We need more vocational education, skilled education. I agree with you on all that. My question actually, when I came up here, was to ask if Doe Sandaluin, if we still have our Burma pharmaceutical industry there, BPI, is that still functioning? And if, I know one of you said there's the need for pharmaceuticals to invest, and we have some great pharmaceutical companies here, and I know that we have in Burma a great need to produce, you know, medication. I don't want to use the word drugs. So, you know, all kinds of medication. For example, India, you know, like Eli Lilly has companies in India where they produce the medication and then distribute it there. So that I thought might be a good opportunity for Myanmar to have that kind of investment, not only for medication to be distributed, drugs to be distributed within the country, but to be able to sell overseas. And I'd like to ask any of our investors here who may have some connection with pharmaceuticals to consider investing in Myanmar in that respect, because I think, like you said earlier, the labor wages are low, and I think we can train people to work in these, in reproducing antibiotics, medicine, etc. And I want to know what that opportunity would be if there is an Nguyen and Ms. Williams, I'm sorry if I didn't get your name correctly, have any insight into that investment. And also the medical devices, if there are any companies that are already there or not. That's my actual questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you for your good question. Yeah. Yes, PPI is still running, and then we also we are in the need of the good quality medicine to our country. Frankly speaking, in our country, maybe 15 years ago, we didn't allowed the foreign companies to do the trading business. Before that time, the foreign companies, they can import the medicine and then they can distribute in our country. So now, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, the government didn't allow the trading for the foreign companies. Those foreign companies can do other businesses except trading. So at that time, we have to rely on some of the neighboring market, let's say China and India. So at the time, we have to rely on the different quality of the pharmaceutical in Myanmar. That's why our government recognizing the importance of the quality of the medicine. That's why our Myanmar Investment Commission, we open up the manufacturing of the pharmaceutical in our country. So in this case, the foreign investor firstly need to require to consult with the Ministry of Industry and Health, for the manufacturing of the pharmaceuticals, and we are also in the very much need of the other medical equipment also. That's why some of the U.S. companies, U.S. and then some of the hospitals, they come to Myanmar for the cancer treatment, and then the X-ray, treatment, and then last month, a delegation led by our health minister, so they make a study tour for 3 weeks in U.S. because with the aim to establish the international standard cardiac and cancer centers in Myanmar. Yeah. So if you want to make investment in pharmaceutical sector, we like to invite and welcome to your investment. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we do need, I think that area hasn't been discussed. That's why I brought it up. And we have such wonderful pharmaceuticals in the United States, and I was wondering if they would take an interest in Myanmar. And, it's also for their own benefit because they can get cheap labor.
I think you are aware that our people these days, if we have to check up our medical check, we want to make medical checkup. We usually go to most of the people go to the neighboring countries, Thailand, Singapore, or some of the rich people go to England or something like that, to US. Yeah, that's why. Because we have very limited the international standard hospitals in our country. Right. So that's why in ASEAN, we have to open up our health sector by this year. And before that, we open up only maybe 20 or 30% in our commitment. But we like to cope with such kind of problem, and our government want to create a better facility for the health. That's why the Ministry of Health is trying our best to increase their commitment to the health sector, to the foreign investors. Yeah.
All right. That sounds great. I think public health education is also important.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Okay. I'm from Burma, and also I belong to NLE. One of the panelists mentioned about Aung San Suu Kyi's message, and the moderator's comment, question about the upper class who benefit. I have to disagree that Aung San Suu Kyi's message was not buying vote before election. She has been speaking about that since she entered politics. She always talked about general population and majority of the people, not for buying vote, number one. Number two, I don't hear about the environmental concern about doing business in Burma. And number three, and the last one, is that when it's come to competition, fair competition, I'll give you one example. When the gas from Bay of Bengal was going to sell out, India gave more than China, but it was given to China. So it is political decisions are still imminent. It's a huge billions of dollars business. So 3 points. Thank you.
All right. Do any of our panelists want to comment on his questions or commentary?
Yeah, I'll take the one about the lady's comments since I'm the one who brought it up. But I certainly did not mean what I said to be pejorative in any. I mean, Daw Suu is a great politician and a great leader. My comments are only meant to point out that there's a lot of complexity going on in Myanmar right now. And as far as the issue of inequality goes, I mean, Myanmar was a very unequal society before the reform started. It's a very unequal society now. So I certainly am not denying that. But I'm afraid I didn't understand what your number two was, or what your question was on number two.
Okay. I don't know if he wants to repeat that. Do you want to repeat your second question again? I mean, he was going to comment. I don't know if you want.
Okay.
So in our foreign investment rules, rule section 6, I think para 34, it is a requirement for the foreign investors, for not only the foreign investor, all investors, they have to submit the environmental and social impact assessment and the by third party, and it is also required to get the recommendation from the concerned department on the environmental and social impact. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I'll just quickly comment. As part of our economic portfolio, we're providing technical assistance to the Attorney General's office and a certain division within the Attorney General's office that reviews commercial contracts. And so we're providing technical assistance in terms of, in terms of the review of commercial contracts to ensure that includes the necessary environmental and social language in there to ensure that when the government is reviewing commercial contracts, that we have those things in place, and that the attorneys in the Attorney General's office are able to review it and adequately ensure that it meets both the national standards but also international standards as well.
So there are aspects of environmental protection, in essence, in those, looking at those contracts and those regulations. Did you have any comment on that? Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists for this thoughtful discussion on the business environment in Burma and Myanmar. And if we could, let's give them a hand.